The gym mirror told him the truth every morning, which was more than he could say for most people in his life. Wide shoulders, a jaw he'd worked for, the specific stillness of a man who had built himself, plank by plank, out of nothing but discipline and a refusal to accept the ceiling everyone else seemed so eager to live under. He thought of Marcus Vail before he thought of breakfast most days. Vail had written the only book that had ever actually rearranged something in him, back when he was 19 and soft and angry in a way he hadn't had language for yet. Vail didn't apologize. Vail didn't explain himself to people who'd never risked anything. Vail said the sentence that changed everything, the one he still repeated to rooms full of 19-year-olds who reminded him of exactly what he used to be. The world rewards men who take and punishes men who ask. He'd built an entire life around that sentence, built it carefully, the way Vail taught, brick by visible brick. And if some of the bricks had come from his parents rather than from nothing, that was a detail the story didn't need. Every founder had a runway. His just happened to have a guest house attached to it. The course had started as a favor to himself more than to anyone watching, a way to say the sentence out loud enough times that it stopped sounding borrowed. Somewhere in the first few thousand views it had turned into something else, a machine that ran whether he fed it or not. And he'd let it, because a machine that ran itself was exactly what Vail meant by leverage. 11,000 of them now, give or take, all of them believing a version of the story that started with him and never once mentioned the guest house. The coin was the part he understood least and trusted most, the way a man trusts a bridge he didn't build but crosses anyway because everyone he respects keeps crossing it too. Bigger money than his had designed it. Bigger money than his would decide when it paid out. He'd been told, in the specific careful language people used when they wanted deniability more than clarity, that his own timing needed to match theirs closely. He had not asked what would happen to the students still holding coins after that timing passed. Some questions cost more to ask than to leave alone. Women were simpler than his following ever gave him credit for understanding. He knew what they wanted, which was strength dressed up as certainty, and he knew what they pretended to want, which was equality, a performance most of them dropped the moment a man stopped performing it back. He didn't resent them for the pretending. He built a whole second income stream teaching other men how to see through it. The doubt arrived the way doubt always arrived lately, sideways, uninvited, refusing to announce itself properly so he could deal with it. A feeling, nothing more, that the walls of this specific version of his life had gotten thinner recently without anything actually changing about them. He'd mentioned it to no one. Vail said a leader who voiced uncertainty had already lost, and he intended to lose nothing, least of all the last few weeks before everything he'd built finally paid out the way he'd always known it would. He caught his own eyes in the mirror and held them a second too long, the way he coached his students to do before every video. Confidence was a physical posture, held until the body believed the lie hard enough to stop calling it one. It worked, mostly. This morning it worked for about 4 seconds before something underneath it, something he had no name for and no intention of examining, reminded him it was still there. He told the feeling what he told everything that threatened the story. Not today. Soon he'd have more money than the feeling could survive, and money, Vail had taught him, cured almost everything a man was too weak to cure himself. He got dressed for the camera, instead of for the day. The camera was the only audience that had never once made him feel like the guest house kid everyone at that open house probably still called him behind his back. The bar was the kind that stayed open for people who worked hours nobody scheduled on purpose, half empty at 3 in the afternoon, radio turned low enough to be furniture rather than music. Admin found Marco at the end of the counter, exactly where the message had said he'd be, nursing a coffee like it had personally wronged him. "You never call unless it's this," Marco said, not turning around. "Sit down anyway. Pretend it's social for one drink." Admin sat. Marco was built the way certain men got built by a decade of using their bodies as the primary tool, rather than the last resort. Thick through the neck and shoulders, knuckles that had healed wrong more than once and never bothered fixing it. None of it matched the way he actually talked, careful and slow, like a man who'd learned late that words could do damage too, and had decided to handle them accordingly ever since. "It's this," admin admitted. "Figured. You don't do social." Marco turned enough to look at him properly, and something in his face softened, despite the flat delivery. "What do you need?" "A man. Professional, does a nightly circuit at a property, doesn't spook easy. I need to know who he answers to, not just what he does." "You could get that from a screen. You always get that from a screen." "Not this time. Whoever's paying him is careful enough that the screens go quiet exactly where I need them not to. This needs a person, not a signal." Marco turned the coffee cup a slow half-circle, thinking, the particular stillness of a man who took requests seriously enough to actually consider the cost before answering. "You know I don't do that world anymore." "I know. I mean it. Not the fighting, not the cruise, not standing in a stairwell doing math on how many teeth a conversation's going to cost. I got out. You're part of why I got to stay out." He said it without drama, a fact rather than a debt being aired for effect. "Asking me back toward that edge, even a step, isn't nothing. I know that too. I wouldn't ask if there was a cleaner way. There's never a cleaner way with you. That's not an insult." A short breath, almost a laugh. "You didn't have to do what you did for me. Nobody would have blamed you for walking. You walked toward it instead, which is the stupidest thing I've ever seen a smart man do. And I've been grateful every single day since, in a way I've never figured out how to say properly." "You don't have to say it. You already paid it back a dozen times over." "Doesn't work that way, and you know it." Marco set the cup down, decision made somewhere in the middle of the sentence. "One conversation. I find out who the guard reports to. I hand it to you clean, and I go back to my actual life the same day. That's the deal I'm making with myself, not with you. That's the only deal I'd want." "Good." Marco stood, dropped a few bills on the counter without counting them, the gesture of a man who'd learned money meant less than the debts that actually mattered. "Give me the address." He memorized it without writing anything down, the same way he seemed to do everything now, quietly, without a trace. "An admin. Next time, maybe try calling when it actually is social. I hear normal people do that." "I'll consider it." "You won't, but it was worth saying out loud." Marco didn't climb anything. That was the whole difference between his method and admin's, and he'd made his peace with it years ago. Some men gathered information from above, patient and unseen. Others gathered it by standing close enough to another man's life that the man eventually told you things without meaning to. He picked the coffee cart 2 doors down from the gate. The one every driver on this street eventually used, because it was there and it was fast. 3 mornings running, same time, same order, until the woman running it started nodding at him like a regular instead of the stranger. Regulars got noticed. Regulars also got ignored in all the ways that mattered, which was the actual point. The guard showed up on the 4th morning, off shift, out of the dark clothes he wore for his rounds, and into something a normal man wore to buy coffee before whatever came next in his day. Marco clocked him without looking directly at him, the specific unfocused attention of a man who'd spent a decade reading rooms for exactly one thing: who in it was actually dangerous, and who just dressed like it. This one was the real thing, not flashy, controlled in a way that flashy men never bothered learning, because flashy men had never needed to survive on discipline alone. Marco knew the type from the inside, or close enough to it. Years ago, he'd have been the muscle in a scene exactly like this one, paid to stand somewhere and look capable of a violence he mostly never had to use. The difference between that life and this man's was money and paperwork, nothing more fundamental than that. Sheet muscle worked for whoever paid that week. This man worked for someone who could afford consistency, which told Marco more about the size of the operation than any file ever could. Marco struck up the kind of conversation men like that expected from men like him: weather and traffic, and a complaint about the price of decent coffee lately. Nothing that asked for anything back. It took 2 more mornings before the guard offered anything unprompted, and even then it was small. A comment about early hours, a joke about clients who thought money bought patience along with everything else. "Rough gig watching a place that quiet," Marco said, testing the door without pushing on it. "Wouldn't know it's quiet if you saw the file." The guard caught himself half a second after saying it. The specific flinch of a professional who almost never slipped and hated that he just had. Forget I said that. Said what? That earned something close to a real laugh, the kind of small trust two careful men extended each other by accident more than choice. Marco didn't push again. Pushing after a slip like that was how you turned a source into someone who never came back to the same coffee cart twice. He didn't get a name that morning, or an org, or anything he could hand over with a bow on it. He got a file. A real one, the kind serious people kept on people who mattered enough to be worth watching closely. That meant the man in that garden mattered to someone far more careful and far better funded than an entitled kid selling courses to teenagers ever could on his own. Marco walked away, already composing the 2 sentences he'd actually say to admin, because 2 sentences was usually all this kind of proof needed. Somebody serious was protecting the guru. The guru had no idea how serious, and probably wouldn't have believed it if he did. "I'm patching someone in," Relay said, no preamble, which was itself a signal that this call was going to be different from the usual 2 voices. "Behave, this is Jonas." A third channel clicked open, quieter than Relay's, the particular hush of someone talking from inside a building where volume itself was a risk. "You must be admin," Jonas said. Younger than admin expected, careful in the way people got careful when they'd spent weeks practicing not sounding like themselves. 6 weeks now. Paid for the course out of an account that doesn't trace back to anything real. Sat through more of his videos than any sane person should. And I have opinions about his breathing technique I will share if anyone ever asks. A dry note under the words, nerves wearing humor as a coat. Relay said you needed eyes on the inside. I'm the eyes. How did you even get the assignment? Admin said, curious despite himself. This isn't a small ask. Relay asked. I said yes before she finished the sentence. A short pause, like he'd surprised himself saying it that plainly. Some of us have been waiting a long time for a reason to actually use what we're good at, instead of just talking about it. This qualified. How deep? Deep enough to be in the private tier chat, not deep enough to be trusted with anything that would get me actually looked at twice. There's a difference, and I'm staying exactly on the safe side of it. A pause. Keys somewhere in the background. His own version of Relay's habit. Which is a long way of saying I've got texture, not treasure. Not yet. Texture's useful. What have you got? He's been erratic the last week. Cancelled 2 calls with no explanation, which he never does. The man treats his own schedule like scripture. Posted something at 2 in the morning that got deleted 11 minutes later, long enough that 3 of us in the tier chat saw it before it vanished. The voice dropped slightly, choosing words with visible care. It read like a man trying to convince himself of something he didn't fully believe. Not his usual register at all. Relay's voice cut in, thoughtful. Timing on that post. 4 days ago, right around when the marketing push started ramping the way you flagged. Admin turned that over, matching it against what he already knew. The guard's new company, the posts leaning harder into urgency than they used to. A man convincing himself of something at 2 in the morning was a man who no longer entirely believed his own performance during daylight either. Anything about money specifically? Transfers, mentions of moving funds. Nothing that direct. He did tell the tier chat offhand that big things were coming for people who stayed loyal through the next few weeks. Sounded like a sales line. Might have been one. A breath. Careful again. I don't want to overclaim what I'm seeing. I see fragments. You 2 are better at turning fragments into a shape than I am. You're doing exactly the right amount, admin said. Stay exactly where you are. Don't reach for more than the sake side gives you. That's the plan. A short pause, warmer. Good to actually talk to you, for what it's worth. You're a very specific kind of legend inside this network. Don't let it go to his head, Relay said. It's already got enough real estate up there. And the channel clicked quiet again, careful right up to the last second of contact. I need you to sit down for this one, Relay said, which was not a phrase she used lightly, and admin felt the shape of the evening change before she'd said anything else. I'm sitting. I finally got a clean read on the wallet structure behind the coin. Not the retail side, the 11,000 buying in through the course. The other side. The side that was there before any of them showed up. Keys, slower than usual. The sound of someone choosing words as carefully as data. One cluster of wallets, linked through transaction patterns I had to chase through 4 different chains to actually connect, holds somewhere between 30 and 40% of total supply. Admin sat with the number, turning it the way he turned everything, looking for where it might be smaller than it sounded. It wasn't. That's not an early investor. That's a controlling position. That's an architect. Her voice had gone flat in the specific way it went when she was working hard to keep something enormous sounding ordinary. Whoever this is didn't buy into the guru's coin. They built it, or built the conditions that let it exist, and let him stand in front of it wearing the face, because faces are cheap, and structures like this are not. He's not smart enough to have built this himself. He's not smart enough to have built a lemonade stand that survived a full season, and I mean that with less contempt than it sounds like. Some men are excellent at being looked at, and terrible at everything the looking is supposed to be covering for. I think that's exactly what he is, a very good face, rented by somebody with a very good structure underneath it. Admin looked out at the dark shape of the garden, sprinklers running their patient, indifferent schedule, entirely unaware that the case above them had just changed size without warning. Can you get a name? No, and that's not me being cautious, that's me being honest about the wall I hit. She exhaled, frustration and something closer to respect, tangled together in the sound. Whoever structured this used shells inside jurisdictions that don't talk to each other. Timed everything, so no single transaction looks like anything on its own. It's clean in a way the guru's own finances have never once been clean. Different hand entirely. A patient one. A patient, competent one, which is a combination I don't love finding on the other side of anything. A pause, this one heavier. I want to be careful here, admin. Whatever this is, it's bigger than a course and a coin and one entitled kid. I don't think we're meant to solve it this month, or maybe even this year. I think we're meant to notice it exists and be smart enough not to walk straight into it before we understand its shape. Understood. We handle what's in front of us. The rest goes in the file. The rest goes in a file I intend to keep opening for a long time, she said, and something in the way she said it made clear she meant it as more than procedure. Some structures are worth remembering exist, even when there's nothing yet to do about them. He didn't disagree. He filed the number the way he filed everything that mattered and couldn't be acted on tonight. Cool and exact, waiting for the day it would matter enough to spend. There's one more piece, Relay said, quieter now. The timing. If this cluster dumps at the unlock, the price doesn't just dip, it craters. Retail holders won't get out at anything close to what they paid in. Some of them won't get out at all before the liquidity's gone. 11,000 people. 11,000 people, minus whatever the guru's own sale skims off the top for himself before the rest of it happens. 2 separate profits, same event. Same victims underneath both of them. She let that sit a moment. I keep coming back to how tidy it is. 1 performance, 2 beneficiaries, and a single date that serves them both. Tidy is its own kind of evidence. Tidy is exactly the kind of evidence that convinces me and nobody else, which is the whole problem with a structure this careful. We need something that isn't just tidy. We need something that's provable. We'll get it. I know we will. I just wanted to say the size of it out loud once, to someone who'd actually understand what I was saying, before I go back to pretending it's a normal Tuesday. The shouting reached admin before he understood any of the words, carried thin and distorted across the garden, on air still warm from the day. He'd come back to the pines out of habit, more than plan, and habit this time paid off in a way he hadn't expected. 2 voices. One of them, the guru's, pitched higher than admin had heard it in any of the videos. All the practiced warmth stripped out of it, and something raw left standing in its place. The other voice, quieter, took longer to place. His mother, answering in the flat, exhausted register of someone who had absorbed this exact tone many times before, and stopped being surprised by it years ago. Admin caught fragments through the open window, something about a schedule, something about money that needed to move faster than money apparently wanted to. A name admin didn't recognize, spat out with real contempt, gone before he could hold on to it long enough to be useful. This was not the voice from the videos. That voice had a rhythm built for cameras, warm and unhurried, engineered to make 40 strangers in a rented room feel personally chosen. This voice had no rhythm left in it at all, just the raw mechanics of a man who had run out of the specific energy performance required, with nothing real underneath it yet to replace the performance with. Then, clearer, cutting through everything else. "You don't get to look at me like that. I built this." His mother's answer came back too quiet to catch, but the guru's response arrived loud enough to carry the whole garden. "I don't care what you think you're seeing. Everything is fine. It's going to be fine." The kind of sentence, Admin thought, that a man only said out loud when he needed an audience to believe it more than he needed it to be true. A door slammed hard enough that Admin felt it faintly in the branch under him, and then silence took over so completely that even the sprinklers seemed to hold off out of some kind of algorithmic tact. Through the window, briefly, he caught the guru's silhouette pacing, phone in hand. The thumb moved too fast over the screen for anything considered, the specific motion of a man drafting and deleting the same message over and over, rather than sending anything at all. Admin logged the whole exchange the way he logged everything, without embellishment, though something in it sat differently than his usual notes did. Fear had a sound, and that had been fear, dressed up badly as anger, the way fear often was in men who'd never been taught another costume for it. He thought about Jonas's deleted post, the one that lived for 11 careless minutes before its author thought better of it. He thought about Marco's file, real and specific, and belonging to someone patient enough to fund a professional. Two separate people, two separate angles, both arriving at the same conclusion from opposite directions. Whatever the guru had built his life on top of, it was no longer holding the way it used to. Good, some old, uncharitable part of him thought. He filed that reaction too, because feeling good about another man's fear was exactly the kind of thing that curdled a warning into something uglier if he let it sit unexamined for too long. He had never wanted to be the kind of man who enjoyed this part. "Windows maybe 4 minutes, Jonas said, voice dropped to something barely above breath. "He's live in the main room, left his laptop with the tier assistants during the break, which he's never done before, and I am the only tier assistant currently standing near it." "Take the 4 minutes, Relay said. "Don't take 5 looking for a 5th. Admin listened from camp, useless in the most literal sense at this exact moment, and aware of it. Every piece of actual leverage sitting with two people who weren't him. It was, he was discovering, a specific kind of hard he hadn't trained for. "I'm in." Jonas's breathing had gone careful, measured, the sound of a man deliberately not letting his own pulse show in his voice. "What am I actually looking for?" "Anything under a folder that isn't named for the course. Financial platforms, exchange logins, anything that looks like it belongs to a different life than the one on the videos." Relay's voice had gone crisp. No wasted syllables, every word doing exactly one job. "Don't open things. Copy first, read never. We go through it safely once you're clear." Copying. A pause, longer than Admin liked. "There's a folder, not the course. Looks personal. Take it. All of it. Don't sort in the moment." Seconds passed the way seconds only pass during exactly this kind of work, each one arriving slightly slower than the last, no matter what a clock would have said about it. Admin found himself standing, though there was nothing to stand for. No ladder to climb, no lashing to check. Just the specific uselessness of a man whose entire skill set was built for patience, asked instead to sit inside someone else's 4 minutes, rather than his own. He understood, distantly, why Relay had wanted this handled by someone other than him. His whole method depended on distance, on watching from far enough away, that a mistake cost him time, rather than blood. Jonas didn't have that luxury tonight. Jonas had a folded laptop, a room full of people who trusted the wrong man completely, and exactly as much cover as his own nerve could manufacture, in real time. "Done," Jonas said. Closing it now, putting it back exactly how it... The sentence didn't finish. 3 full seconds of dead air followed it, the worst 3 seconds of the whole exchange before his voice came back, quieter and considerably less steady. "Someone's coming back early. I'm stepping away from the table. Casual. I'm being casual." "You're doing fine," Relay said, and the calm in it was so complete, Admin almost believed she felt it, which he understood, distantly, was the entire point of saying it that way. Walk toward the door you'd walk toward if nothing had happened. Don't look at the laptop again. A long 10 seconds, then quieter still. Clear. I'm in the hallway. I think I'm clear. You're clear, Relay confirmed a moment later, something in her own exhale giving away exactly how much she'd been holding until that word landed. Get somewhere you can actually breathe. We'll go through what you got once you're safe, not before. Admin sat back down slowly, the adrenaline that belonged to someone else's 4 minutes, taking its time leaving a body that hadn't earned it. He recognized the feeling from the far side, the version he usually caused, rather than absorbed, and found he liked it considerably less from here. That was too close. It was exactly as close as it needed to be to work, Relay said, though her voice hadn't fully steadied either. We don't get the easy version of this kind of proof. We never have, and I don't know why tonight surprised me. No, Admin agreed. He sat with that a while after the channel went quiet, turning over exactly what it had cost to get 4 minutes worth of proof. Not money. Not time, not really. A young man's nerve, spent all at once, in a room full of people who would have called him a liar if he'd told them the truth about what he'd just done and why. Admin had asked people for a great many things over the years. He was still, after all this time, not entirely at peace with how easily some of them said yes. The files sat open across 2 screens at base camp, Relay's voice threading through them from wherever she actually was, the two of them working the same problem, from opposite ends of a line neither had ever bothered measuring. It's not everything, she said. It's enough. Wallet addresses tied to accounts under names that trace back, eventually, to him personally, rather than the course entity. A spreadsheet. If you can believe a man like this keeps a spreadsheet, tracking his own token balance against a calendar. The unlock date, circled, with a note next to it that just says, "Move before." 2 words. I don't think he wrote them expecting anyone but himself to ever read them. Admin turned that over, matching it against the shape Relay had already drawn of the larger structure sitting above him. So he knows. Not the size of it, not who's behind it, but he knows something's coming, and he's planning to get his own money out first. That's exactly what this looks like. His own stake, small compared to the cluster we found, but real money by any normal measure. Time to sell just ahead of whatever the bigger structure does. She let that sit a beat. 2 frauds, nested, his own quiet exit riding inside a much larger one he probably doesn't fully understand, running on a clock somebody else set. Admin sat with the number Relay had read out, the shape of 2 frauds sharing 1 clock. It answered the question the message thread and the guard and the crypto slide deck had all been circling without quite landing on. He wasn't only a face rented by someone bigger. He was also, in his own small, greedy way, using the borrowed structure to rob the people underneath him twice. Once through the course, and once through the coin, without ever having to build anything himself. Is it enough to move on? It's enough to build the shape of a case. It's not enough yet to survive someone with a good lawyer calling it circumstantial. Her voice carried the specific frustration of someone who can see the finish line and still had real distance left to cover. We need one more piece, something that ties his personal sell order directly to knowledge of what the unlock actually does to the retail side. Intent, not just timing. We'll find it. I know, I just wanted the frustration on the record before I go back to being useful about it. A short, tired laugh. Get some rest. Jonas earned tonight's quiet more than either of us did, and I intend to let him have it. Admin looked at the spreadsheet a moment longer. 2 words sitting at the center of it, doing more damage to a man's careful mythology than either of them probably realized yet. Move before. Not a plan. A confession written for an audience of exactly one that had never once expected anyone patient enough to come looking. He thought about Vale, whoever Vale actually was. The name that had surfaced twice now in fragments Jonas had passed along. A book title mentioned in a testimonial, a phrase repeated like scripture in one of the recovered files. He filed the name without chasing it yet. Some threads earned immediate attention. Others earned a place in the drawer next to everything else waiting for the moment patience finally turned into use. Admin came to the hackerspace for a small thing, a connector Patch had promised to have ready. Nothing that should have taken longer than 10 minutes out of an otherwise ordinary afternoon. He heard her voice before he saw her, which was itself strange enough to slow his steps in the doorway. because her voice had never once before existed anywhere except directly against his ear. Which is exactly why I told him not to open anything. And he didn't, which is the only reason we're having a good day instead of a very bad one. She was leaning against Patch's bench like she'd been coming to this exact spot for years rather than minutes. A laptop sat open in front of her. Dark hair pulled back with the specific efficiency of someone who'd long since stopped dressing for anyone else's benefit. Not tall. Compact in a way that read as coiled rather than small. The posture of someone who'd learned early that taking up the right amount of space mattered more than taking up a lot of it. She looked up when the door moved. Whatever she saw in his face made something flicker across hers. There and gone before he could have named it, even if naming things like that had ever been a skill of his. He'd built a version of her in his head anyway, the way anyone would, despite months of telling himself he hadn't. That version dissolved on contact with the real one, not replaced so much as corrected, the way a bad map gets corrected by the actual ground underneath it. She was watching him do the recalibration in real time, visibly entertained by however much of it showed on his face. "You're staring," she said, which was somehow exactly the voice he knew, landing strangely on a face he'd never once pictured correctly in all the months of hearing it. "I'm recalibrating." That's a very you way to say staring. She closed the laptop halfway, unhurried, the gesture of someone reclaiming a room rather than being caught in it. Relay, in case the voice needed a body attached to make it official. "I know who you are." Knowing and updating aren't the same file, she said, and something in the dryness of it told him she'd been waiting a while to use that line on him specifically. Nearby at his own bench, Jonas looked between the two of them with careful amusement. He seemed to weigh whether commenting would help or hurt his own situation, and chose wisely to keep working on the laptop in front of him instead. This was, Admin gathered from the man's face, the first time he'd seen either of them look anything other than entirely composed. "You two have met then," Patch said, not looking up from whatever he was soldering, in the tone of a man who found the entire situation quietly funny and had no intention of admitting it. "We've talked for months," Relay said. "Meeting is apparently a separate transaction." Admin found the connector on the bench exactly where Patch had left it, and picked it up mostly for something to do with his hands. Some unexamined corner of him registered that the last few minutes had rearranged something without asking his permission first. He didn't chase the feeling. Chasing feelings he didn't have a name for had never once gone anywhere useful in his experience. And this one, whatever it was, could wait its turn behind everything else currently filed and pending. Relay, for her part, had gone back to watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read, somewhere between amusement and something quieter underneath it that she didn't let surface long enough to name either. If she'd been hoping for a particular reaction to finally seeing her, whatever it was, his face apparently hadn't delivered it. She recovered fast enough that only someone looking for the recovery would have caught it at all. And Admin, predictably, wasn't looking. "Jonas got us the ledger fragment," he said instead, because that at least was a fact he knew exactly how to hold. "Since we're all here." Relay's eyebrows went up, the fastest transition from personal to professional he'd ever watched a face make. "Since we're all here," she agreed. "Let's actually use it." Patch, without looking up from his soldering, said what none of the rest of them apparently wanted to be the one to say first. "Nice to finally see the two of you in the same room, by the way. Took long enough." Nobody answered that directly, which was, in its own quiet way, an answer. Relay pulled a stool around and set the laptop where all four of them could see it. It was the gesture of someone who'd stopped treating this as a two-person operation the moment she'd said it out loud back at base camp, and hadn't looked back since. "Since everyone's here," she said, "everyone should actually know what we're dealing with." She walked them through it in the same order she'd walked Admin through it days earlier. The ledger fragment. The two words that amounted to a confession. Then the wallet cluster sitting underneath all of it. A foundation nobody had known to look for until tonight. Patch listened with his arms crossed, expression unreadable in the specific way of a man filing information rather than reacting to it. Jonas went noticeably paler, somewhere around 30 to 40%. "That's not the guy I've been watching for 6 weeks, Jonas said. That's a different scale of problem entirely. It's the same problem. Wearing a face small enough to actually reach, Relay said. He's still real. He's still doing real damage to real people. He's just not the whole story. And I'd rather you know that going in than find out the hard way later. 30 to 40% of what exactly? Jonas said, still catching up. In actual money, not percentages. More than any of us are equipped to recover, and more than any of us should waste tonight trying to picture. Relay's tone didn't soften the number, just refused to let it derail the room. Numbers that size stop meaning anything useful past a certain point. What matters is the shape of it, not the total. Do we know who? Hatch asked, the first thing he'd said since they'd started. No. Clean shells, patient timing, exactly the kind of structure that doesn't want to be found by people like us. Could take years, might never happen at all. Relay's voice stayed level, but something under it acknowledged the size of that admission. I don't love saying that out loud. I love pretending we don't know it even less. Admin let the silence sit a moment before speaking. The specific silence of 4 people recalibrating the size of a fight they'd thought they understood. It doesn't change what we do next. The guru's still the part we can reach. The evidence is still real. We finish this part of it properly, and the rest goes in a file we keep open for as long as it takes. That's a very patient answer, Jonas said, for something that just got a lot scarier. It's the only kind of answer that's ever worked. Admin looked at each of them in turn. Patch unreadable. Relay watching him with an attention that had nothing to do with the case anymore. Jonas still visibly working to fit the new scale into his understanding of what he'd signed up for. We don't need to solve the whole structure tonight. We need to finish what's in front of us without getting anyone hurt doing it. Define anyone, Patch said, because I count 4 of us in this room who now know more than 4 people should probably know. Nobody had a clean answer for that, which was itself the most honest thing said all night. Relay closed the laptop, decision made in the gesture more than in any sentence that followed it. Then we move carefully. We move together, and none of us pretends this got smaller just because we said it out loud. Patch finally looked up from his crossed arms, something dry and steady in his expression. For what it's worth, I've been in worse rooms with worse odds. This one at least has a plan attached to it. He said it the way he said most things, flat enough to sound like a report rather than reassurance, though everyone in the room seemed to take it as both. Together, Jonas repeated, testing the word like it cost more than he'd expected. All right. Together. It was, Admin thought, a strange word to hear out loud after months of doing this alone with only a voice for company. He didn't examine why it landed the way it did. Some words earned that courtesy. This one, tonight, would simply have to wait its turn like everything else. The street outside held the particular quiet of a block that emptied out early. Most of the windows already dark. The hackerspace's own light, the last one still burning behind them. Relay walked half a step beside him rather than behind, which felt different in a way Admin couldn't immediately account for. The geometry of a voice suddenly having a body attached and needing somewhere to put it. That went about as well as a conversation about a shadow criminal organization can go, she said. Nobody left. That's a low bar, but we cleared it. We did. She glanced over at him, quick, assessing, the specific look of someone deciding whether to say something and then deciding against it, twice, before finally choosing a third option instead. This is strange, by the way, walking next to you. I've spent months being a voice in your ear, and approximately 4 minutes being a person standing near your actual shoulder. Strange how? Just strange. Not bad strange. A pause, her voice dropping slightly, losing some of its usual polish. You didn't say anything, back there, about how I look, or don't look, or whatever people are supposed to say in that situation. I wasn't fishing for it. I just noticed the absence. Admin turned that over, the way he turned over most things that arrived without a clear shape. I wasn't sure there was a correct thing to say that wouldn't sound like I'd been picturing something specific this whole time. Had you? Not on purpose. That got a real laugh out of her, short and surprised, some of the earlier tension leaving her shoulders with it. That might be the most honest answer you've ever given me, and you gave it entirely by accident. Most of my honest answers are accidents. Consider it a pattern. I'll add it to the file I keep on you. She said it lightly, but something underneath the lightness suggested the file was real, or real enough, a private accounting she'd been keeping for longer than tonight. You know more about how I sound annoyed than most people know about how their own family sounds annoyed. It felt strange, being the one who finally got looked at instead of just listened to. Strange bad. Strange unfinished. There's a difference. She didn't elaborate further, and he didn't push, mostly because pushing had never once been a skill he could claim credibly. They walked another block in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, so much as unfamiliar. Two people used to a relationship built entirely out of voice were suddenly discovering it also had footsteps, a pace, a shared distance that had to be negotiated in real space rather than just timed over a channel. Admin noticed the strangeness of it. He noticed, distantly, that something about the whole evening had left him slightly off his usual balance, though he filed the observation the way he filed most things he didn't have an immediate use for. Relay noticed something too, watching him not notice, and let it go without comment, because pushing past an absence like that had never once made it arrive any faster. Some doors opened when they opened. Hers, apparently, was going to keep being patient a while longer. "Good night, Admin," she said, heeling off toward whatever direction led back to wherever she actually lived, a detail he realized, with mild surprise, he still didn't know. "Good night." He watched her go longer than the moments strictly required before he turned back toward his own night, carrying something he couldn't name and wasn't looking for a name for, not yet. The message came through flagged urgent, which Jonas had never once used before, not even during the 4 minutes that had nearly gone wrong days earlier. Admin read it twice before he let himself react to it. Someone's asking questions about who touched the laptop. Not me specifically, not yet, but they're asking. Admin kept his voice level when he called, mostly for Jonas's benefit rather than his own. One of the tier assistants got pulled aside today. Quiet conversation, closed door, the kind that doesn't happen over something small. Jonas's words came fast, controlled but clearly costing him more control than usual to keep that way. Nobody said my name, but somebody upstream noticed the laptop wasn't exactly how they left it, and now people are getting asked things, and I'm one of the people who could plausibly have been near it. Have you been questioned directly? No, which might mean I'm not a suspect yet, or might mean they're being careful about who they tip off first. I genuinely don't know which, and not knowing is worse than either answer on its own. Admin turned the problem over the way he turned over everything, looking for the shape of the actual risk underneath the fear driving the report. Do you need to disappear from the course entirely, tonight, or can you hold your position a while longer? A pause, longer than Admin liked, I think I can hold. If I vanish now, right after this, that's its own kind of confession. If I stay calm and boring for a few more days, I might actually be safer than if I run. That's your call, not mine, not Relay's. You're the one standing in the room. I know. Something steadied in his voice, the sound of a decision actually landing rather than just being spoken aloud to sound brave. I'll hold, but I wanted you to know the temperature changed. I didn't want to find out later you'd have wanted that information sooner. You were right to send it exactly when you did. Good. A breath, unsteady again for just a moment before he caught it. Whoever's asking these questions, Admin, is that the guards people or the bigger thing Relay found? Admin didn't have an honest answer for that, and lying to a frightened man about the size of his own risk had never once sat well with him. I don't know yet. That's the truest thing I can tell you tonight. Comforting, Jonas said, dry despite everything underneath it. I'll take true over comforting most days, just maybe not tonight. The channel went quiet, and Admin sat with the specific weight of a risk he hadn't personally chosen to carry, borrowed onto someone else's shoulders by a plan he'd helped build. He didn't like the feeling. He suspected, before the night was over, he was going to have to get considerably more used to it. This was the cost Rayleigh had named weeks ago, back when the case was still small enough to fit inside a garden and an earpiece. Bringing more people in meant more people standing exactly where the danger eventually landed. He'd known that in the abstract the entire time. Hearing fear in a stranger's voice over an urgent flag was a different kind of knowing entirely, the kind that sat in the chest rather than the head. He called Rayleigh before he let himself think too long about whether the hour was reasonable. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she'd already seen the same flag. "I saw it," she said, before he could say anything. "I've been sitting with it for 4 minutes, trying to decide whether panicking would help him or just make me feel better." "Would it?" "No, so I'm not going to." Her voice had gone careful, controlled in the specific way people got controlled around fear they refused to let win. "We watch. We stay ready to pull him out the second holding stops being the safer option. That's the whole plan tonight, and I hate how thin it is." "It's not thin, it's honest." "Same thing tonight, probably," she said, and neither of them tried to make that sound better than it actually was. Admin was back at Camp IP1, Garden, by the time Rayleigh called again. The platform held steady under him the way it always did, familiar enough tonight to feel almost like an apology for everything else that had stopped being simple. "Tell me something good," he said. "I don't have something good. I have something that changes the math." Her voice had lost every trace of the warmth from the hackerspace, replaced entirely by the flat, fast register she used when a fact mattered more than how it landed. The wallet cluster moved 4 minutes ago. Not the whole 30 to 40%, a test amount, small enough to look routine to anyone not already watching for it. A test amount before what? Before a real move. That's how structures like this usually behave right before they commit to something big. One quiet transaction to confirm the mechanism still works. Then the actual event follows fast, sometimes within hours. She let that land before finishing it. "Admin, I don't think we have 9 days anymore. I think whatever's coming might already be starting." He sat with that, the calm architecture of the entire case rearranging itself around a timeline that had just collapsed without asking permission. Jonas, still inside, still one careless question away from being found out. Marco's file, real but unfinished. The ledger fragment, enough to build a case and not yet enough to end one. All of it had been built assuming days. Days had just become possibly hours. Weeks of patience had gone into every piece of this, gathered slowly, the way he gathered everything, trusting that time was the one resource he could always count on having more of. He'd built an entire life on that assumption. Trees didn't rush, camps didn't rush. Cases, in his experience, rewarded the man who could outweight everyone else at the table. Nothing about tonight had asked his permission before deciding that particular rule no longer applied. "Get Jonas out." Already messaged him, waiting to hear back. A pause, and for the first time all night something under her control cracked slightly, just at the edges. "If this is starting now, we are nowhere near ready for it to start now. Then we get ready faster than we've ever had to." That's not a plan, that's a slogan. It's the only true thing I've got at 11 o'clock at night with 4 minutes of warning. He looked out at the dark garden, unchanged, indifferent, running its expensive schedule exactly as it always had, while everything above it had just tilted hard towards something neither of them had fully mapped yet. Whatever this is, we're not doing it alone anymore. That's the one thing that's actually different tonight. Small comfort. Real one, though. Relay didn't answer right away, and in the gap admin heard something that might have been a message arriving on her end, a small sound that made her breath catch before she'd even read it. "Jonas is answering," she said. "He's safe, for now." A beat, longer than the words needed. "For now" is going to have to be enough tonight, because I don't think either of us gets to sleep until we know what 4 minutes just started. Neither of them said goodnight this time. There wasn't room left in the night for it. Admin sat a long while after the channel finally went quiet, looking up through the same gap in the same leaves. It had watched over every version of this case so far, from a nickname to a number to a name that still wasn't a name. Whatever 4 minutes had just started, it was no longer a story he got to tell at his own pace. For the first time since a door had unlocked itself in the middle of an empty house, the case was setting the clock instead of him. He didn't sleep. There didn't seem to be a version of tonight that included it.